Hey, welcome back. Today's video is a match breakdown for an F-class match and part 2 of our large rifle primer versus small rifle primer brass for the 308 F open rifle. And there were some interesting things that I learned at this match that might be good things for you to learn. So let's get into it. First, this match was a 500-yard match. A little bit on the short side for me because I don't really do 300 yards at all and 500 very little. The range, which is Seattle Rifle and Pistol Club in Machias, Washington, is a wind tunnel. I mean, we're talking indoor F-class. When the wind really howls there, you might have to hold in the 9 ring with a 308 shooting 168s. It is not a big wind range by any stretch of the imagination, and you guys know me. I like it when it blows. Ooh, that didn't sound good, did it? Let's start with how well my 308 rifle shot so that those of you interested in large rifle primer versus small rifle primer can be satisfied and go do something else with your time. And then we'll talk about F-class matches in general. The first 2 relays were shot with large rifle primer brass with the 44.2 grain load that I identified in the previous video. I didn't try the other loads because, well, I can only try about one thing at a time. And to be fair, several people have criticized that my load development techniques are not statistically significant. And to that, I say they are absolutely 100% correct, but you don't get to see my validation process normally. In this case, you're going to see it. The first 2 relays were shot with the 44.2 grain load, 40 rounds for record, plus however many sighters I fired. So we're going to have a good span of experience here to estimate how well the rifle shoots. Because like I said, we're in a wind tunnel. The wind isn't going to move you around very much in there. So here's the first relay. I just took a photo of the results because, you guys don't need to see me shoot this. And worse yet, when I set up the camera, this is what I got every time anyone pulled the trigger inside of this shooting shed with this huge baffle. With that in mind, here's that first relay. So a 218 is pretty darn good. And it's pretty solid. It looked like it was grouping pretty well at 500 yards. And admittedly, this joker wasn't shooting the gun as well as he should have. The one that went out the left was yours truly. It was not the rifle, and it definitely was not the wind because there wasn't enough wind to move a flea fart halfway across the target, much less a heavy bullet screaming out there at 2720. Let's go ahead and shoot a second relay. Now on this second relay, I'm going to be very clear about my technique with this particular rifle. The low hits I left low because I didn't want to have to adjust the scope. So 217X, it could have been a 219 pretty easily, maybe even a 20. But nonetheless, it shot really well. Not to be outdone, I shot the last relay with small primer brass with my 44.35 grain load, and I get this. Now, if you're thinking, wow, those are some pretty impressive scores, so am I. I shot a personal record. And with that in mind, sometimes your best isn't good enough because my friend Jay, shooting a 7.65 PRC, shot a 600 with 56 X's and a 220X on the last relay. And the last relay of the day was probably the toughest because it had the most mirage, so you actually had to do your part to aim in the middle. Let's talk about holds here. My hold all day with the 308 with 185 grain juggernauts, doing 2720. The furthest I held from center was the edge of the X ring on one side, and I went just the other side of the letter X the other direction. That was the totality of the hold. It was about as still as anyone could ask for. Let's get to F-class match administration for just a minute. I have a piece of advice for match directors out there. Because we had a failure on the range that we were able to identify during blow-off, because we had a blow-off period before the first match. During the blow-off period, we had 2 targets that both shooters said that they couldn't get their elevation where they wanted it. Even adjusting 2 minutes, the point of impact didn't shift. That should raise alarm bells for all of you, especially if you're using an electronic target. Here's what happens. If 2 wires are crossed on the electronic target, it will then have a top sensor at both the upper corner and a lower corner, and a bottom sensor, upper corner and lower corner, and that makes the elevation a straight flat line right in the middle of the sensor area. The same can apply if you cross the wires for either the top or bottom pair of sensors, left and right. It will then shoot a vertical line in the target regardless of where it hits on the target. This leaves us with a problem. Now, you can only do one or the other. You can't do both. If you do both, you get a reverse acting target and people throwing stuff. If we have a perfectly calibrated target, which I've been an advocate for before, and I have changed my mind. If you have a perfectly calibrated target, you can end up with a situation where someone shoots a national record, shoots a match-winning score, or whatever have you, because they don't have to manage their elevation. The same holds true for if they cross them left and right, and now all they have to do is hold elevation, and they get a wonderful score and great wind calls, right? While everybody else is getting bounced all over the target. This is not a good situation. It's not good for the game, and it's not good for the shooter, and it definitely is not good for fairness. So here's the advice. I'm going to ask that you offset the point of impact on your targets. Now, most mid-range match directors do this to preserve the center of the target so there's something to aim at, but not all. Offset the vertical point of impact by at least 1 minute of angle. That way, if the thing sticks in the middle, they're shooting 9s just above the top of the 10 ring. And the shooter will squawk about it, which will tell you that the target's messed up, so you can go fix it. Now, the sneaky one. What if we cross left and right? That can happen just as easy, and it's an error. It's not somebody trying to cheat. It's an error in setting up, and it's easier to do than the up and down is. For left and right, I will suggest that you offset the left and right by half a minute. Why half a minute instead of a full minute? If someone has elevation that they're controlling and they're offset by half a minute off into the 10 ring, they're not ever going to be able to get it into the X ring where they want it, and they're going to squawk about it, that I can't get this target in. And the other thing is, they're not going to shoot any national records. Now that we're shooting these targets for regionals and registered matches, and we're writing down records when we don't even know if the target's accurate, but I digress. That way the shooter will squawk because they can't shoot the score they want to. This is really super important. If you're a match director, if you're helping set up matches, if you're shooting in matches, you need to understand the risk of having a target miswired. This is totally a setup problem. It's nothing wrong with the target itself. It's just the way it gets set up. Sometimes people make mistakes, and you can't beat human error out of humans because it's human error. But you can set up systems so that the errors cause problems that you have to go back and fix. I think that's probably the better way to do things, long range or mid range. And it also helps preserve the centers so that the shooters have something to shoot at. It's kind of a win-win situation. Now, the downside to doing this, just so everybody's clear, is if you're on the long range target, now all of a sudden your 5 and 6 rings are not big enough. And if they hit at the very, say you're offsetting low, if they hit at the very bottom of the board, they're going to be outside of the sensor area and they're going to score a miss instead of that 6 that they deserve. So it's not a perfect solution. But with the way scores work out on F-class matches, I think that the lesser of two evils is to have an offset to correct for that error. Anyway, guys, that's what I have for this match. I shot a 654X, which is a personal record, and got beaten badly by a good friend of mine. But all in all, I think it was a success for the 308. If you want to see more match breakdowns like this, leave me a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, shoot straight. Go shoot some matches and have some fun. And I'll see you in the next video.